The Nikon Z6 released 3 months ago, and in the last 2 weeks, it's really kind of taken the camera world by storm with the announcement from Nikon and Atomos about the Z line of cameras being able to do ProRes RAW sometime here in the summer. Which is pretty cool because I actually really like the Z6 and the path it provides for the future. So how's it holding up after 3 months? Let's find out. What's up everyone, I'm the Everyday Dad, and if I can figure it out, you can figure it out. So without a doubt, I think that the Nikon Z6 is the current best full-frame mirrorless video camera on the market today. Now, had the Atomos news come out before I made my gear list of 2018 video, this would have pushed it out in front of the Sony a7 III. Still a great camera. The Sony a7 III is still a great camera, but this makes the Nikon even better. Now, it's not a secret that I'm not the biggest fan of full-frame cameras because to get that really nice, beautiful full-frame image, you really need a lot of support. And that mainly comes from bigger lenses, bigger bodies, bigger and heavier everything, which for a solo content creator like myself, that makes everything a little harder. And I try to minimize the friction in my video production as much as possible. But after 3 months, let's talk about what I both really like and what I don't like as much after making use of this in 15 full video production cycles, plus several live streams. If you happen to find this video and it's your first time seeing or hearing about the Z6, let's cover some basic video specs so you can understand a little more what we're going to be talking about here in a little bit. This isn't going to be super in-depth, so if you do want more in-depth specs, you want more in-depth features about the cameras, I will leave links in the description below for my playlist covering the Z6, and to make it even just so much easier, at the end there will be some end cards that you can also click on. Once you've watched this entire video, you can then watch even more about the Z6 because hopefully we'll get you pumped because I really like it. The Z6 was released in November of 2018, and it and the Z7, its bigger photography brother, are Nikon's first foray into the world of full-frame mirrorless cameras. It can record in up to 4K 30 frames per second and can do that in 10-bit out to an external recorder, and soon here, ProRes RAW. For slow motion, the Z6 is rocking a pretty standard 1080p at 120 frames per second. When it comes to recording media, the Z6 has a single XQD card slot. Way more on that later. And finally, in the last of the big video specs, it has a 273-point phase detection autofocus system, which, while, I've heard people having issues with it, I've personally found it to work perfectly fine for what I need an autofocus system to do. I mean, right now, are we in focus? Let's look. Meh. I just need to be in focus like right now. That's the most important part. Okay, specs and boring stuff are done with. Let's cover what I both really like and what I both don't like about the Z6 now that it's been a constant companion at my side. Even though you're not at my side right now, you're on the tripod, but you're close enough to me. First up, let's talk about the negatives because there are a few things that I do have issues with in the system. And number one of the things I don't like is the standard picture profiles straight out of camera. For someone that spent a long time relying on the auto mode dial on my Lumix G7, needing to know about the ability to change specific parts of picture profiles, that would have been beyond me had I just went out and bought this camera. And the picture profile without any adjusting, all of them are horribly overdone in the contrast department. When I did the initial video impressions of the Z6, I thought I'd done something wrong with the camera and that maybe something was broken, maybe I had a setting off or my white balance was off because the footage was pretty rough. Yes, I know that you can change this, and obviously I have since turned down my contrast all the way down, but for people getting into video or looking to move into this system from something like the Sony a7 III, where you don't really need to mess with the picture profiles to get a good image, you just pop it into PP1 and you are good to go. I mean, that's gonna be a friction point and a hurdle you're gonna have to overcome and figure out, which is just something I don't like. Next up in the things I don't like is both a negative we'll talk about here and a positive we'll talk about in things that I like. And we're gonna do that because I'm a complicated person like that. And that is the XQD card slot. Yes, I get it. The XQD is supposedly a superior card to SD. I actually do get it since we'll be talking about that in the positive. But the real pain in the butt is trying to get a hold of XQD cards, plus the extra cost involved. I mean, they are not cheap pieces of recording media. Now, again, I don't care about the single card slot. even on cameras that have dual card slots, I end up only using one to record anyway. I mean, I'm an online content creator, I'm not an event videographer, I don't need backups. And I really don't like how much these darn cards cost. I've got one XQD card and it's 64 gigabytes. That cost me $132. That is a huge amount for recording 64 gigabytes worth of standard bitrate 4K 30 frames per second. That is a lot. And I'm also aware of CF Express coming soon to hopefully drop the price and increase the performance of this slot. But if I could design the body, I would have also included an SD card for those of us that don't want to invest so heavily into a recording media that does not work with a single other camera we own, unless we own lots of Nikon cameras. I don't. I currently have a Canon M50, a Sony RX100 Mark V, and this Z6, and only one of them takes XQD. Another thing I don't like is how the audio recorded internally sounds when using the camera's internal preamps. This is more of a gripe than a legitimate problem, as the easy solution, the one that we're doing right now, is to drop the internal recording as low as possible and let your microphone do the work if it's able. Like right now, we're using the Rode VideoMic Pro Plus with plus 20 decibel, and the internal recording on the Z6 is all the way down. But again, if you're someone that uses auto settings, the internal preamps are pretty bad. There is a built-in limiter which should keep your audio from peaking unnecessarily. Here's a clip of me talking on auto from a previous video.
Not only is the video quality good, but it's got recording specs and recording abilities that make like pro cameras like blush with envy. So we're on. Hey.
And the rest of the video's audio is coming from the Z6, like we already mentioned, with the internal audio set to 1. So there is a very, very big difference. So yes, you can get good audio, you just need to know how to maximize it. And last of my things I don't like, now this one's weird, but stay with me, the lenses mount the wrong way. Every other camera I've used, Sony, Canon, Panasonic, Fuji, they all lock their lenses into place going clockwise. Nikon is the only one I've come across that goes against the grain and they go counterclockwise. This might not sound like a lot, but when your brain is ingrained that lenses turn one way, every single time you go to change the lens, there's like a hesitation. It's like the lizard brain inside of my brain tries to do the same thing it's done 1,000 other times with different cameras. So still to this day, I try taking the lenses off the opposite way. And it's a thing, it just drives me crazy. It drives me crazy. And the last thing I want to mention is another negative, but is also another positive, because again, I'm deep. This problem does get closer to getting fixed each and every day though, and that's native lens selection. As of today, there are only 3 native lenses for the Z mount: a 35 1.8, a 50mm 1.8 that we are currently filming on, and the kit lens 24-70 f4. At CES, Nikon showed off their soon-to-be released 14 to 30mm f4 lens, and there was even a display of the 24-70 2.8 lens, which, while exciting, means you will need to adapt glass if these do not cover the focal ranges you need for the next, few years as they build out their lens roadmap. But those are mostly stretches for something to complain about. The only one, the real only complaint I have that would significantly make me think twice about recommending this camera is absolutely the XQD card. But that's an awesome segue into the positives because number 1, the XQD card. Yep, I complained about it and its price and availability and they still suck. But if you actually find yourself with one, dang, does it transfer data fast. Quite frankly, I've never seen anything like it. You can get some pretty big video files transferred like lightning fast. Plus, the card itself does feel pretty robust, and while I've now broken several SD cards, ruining one of my cameras in the process through my own idiocy, throughout my now 2 years on YouTube, these cards are pretty darn rugged. Though I do tend to baby it as I don't want to spend another $130 on one, so it's probably not a fair comparison as I baby it way more than I baby SD cards, but it's something that I really do like. Another thing that I really like about the Z6 is the rear touchscreen. While I do wish it fully articulated, and that would make this camera like the perfect camera, this thing has a really great touch interface. It's crazy easy to go through the menus and either change the settings quickly, or you can just tap to focus, and once tapped, it just starts tracking what you want to keep in focus. Like, that's super easy. We talk about this a lot, but what I consider to be the most important for online camera system is their ease of use and making sure there is very little friction between setting up and hitting record to get usable footage. And that's something that the Z6 really really excels at. And while the rear screen helps out with that a lot, the rest of the body pulls its weight too. And one of my absolute all-time favorite things about the Z6 is the port covers for the HDMI power microphone slots. It is so darn easy to just get it out of the way, get everything plugged in. I mean, if you've ever used a Sony a7 III, you know what I'm talking about. I use all three of these ports weekly when I do my live show, Saturdays at 8 p.m. Eastern, and here it's not a problem to have power, audio, and external HDMI all hooked up. I love this. More camera companies need to take advantage of this. It's a great system. Let's bring out that other negative that is a positive, and that's the lenses again. And it's true that the lens selection continues to be a negative, but these lenses are a straight up positive in my book. And honestly, the 24-70 kit lens is the reason I went with the Z6 over something smaller like the Fuji X-T3. Normally full frame lenses are huge, bulky, heavy, and while that works for some, it straight up does not work for me because again, I need the smallest, lightest package that I can get. The 24-70 f4 and the 2.8 24-70 I saw at CES are some of the smallest full frame lenses I've ever seen. The 14-30 was also a shockingly small lens that I got to play around with at CES. It's really tiny. And that's the benefit of the larger Z mount. Yes, other brands make awesome lenses and have perfectly functional lens mounts, Sony, but the additional size and the smaller flange distance on the Nikons mean the engineers have much more leeway to make smaller and faster lenses. Now, I'm not personally really all that excited about the 50mm 0.95 Noct lens, but the idea behind it and those other ones is something that I'm a huge fan of. You may not be fully on board with the Z6 as of today, but in the future, that's where the future of development can come. We've talked about the recording media, the lenses, the body, but before this video gets too out of hand with me, heaping my love onto the Z6, let's finally talk about the image quality. Long story short, it's great. I think the 4K coming out of the Z6 looks awesome, and once you've got your preferred picture profile dialed in, it just works and works and works. Once I got that initial profile figured out, I've never been disappointed with how my images turn out. And even the auto ISO when set to aperture priority mode, it works really well to keep the exposure smooth instead of like jumping between levels, kind of like that was my biggest negative about the Fuji X-T3 was instead of being smooth, it was jumpy. The Z6, it's much smoother. One last thing about the body, and it's kind of about lenses again, but even when the camera's in autofocus mode, you can use the manual focus dial on the lenses to help get little details in focus before then letting the autofocus take over. Now on another camera, you might have to pop it into manual focus, dial it in, pop it back into autofocus and let it work that way, but on the Z6 you don't have to do that. You just take manual focus, get it to where you want it, then the autofocus can take over, and that's really impressive to me. And lastly, this isn't anything I've actually seen in the camera or used myself, but the announcement of the ProRes RAW when recording with an Atomos Ninja 5, like we're doing right now, is really exciting to me. And frankly, I don't expect to use the RAW recording very often, or maybe at all unless I'm outside or need something very specific for dynamic range purposes, but what I'm really happy about is what that means. Canon, Sony, Panasonic, they all have cinema lines of cameras that they generally try to protect. Now, Panasonic is the best at this, and one of my favorite things about Panasonic is they will give you the best camera they can at a given price point. But what's even better about Nikon is they don't have any cinema cameras to protect. They can add whatever they want without worrying about cannibalizing higher camera lines. Like, that's really impressive, and it's very important to note, because while I really like the Z6, I'm really excited to see what new firmware will come out, or what the next generation of the Z mount of cameras can do or can pull off, or what features they can put in because they don't have to worry about their cinema line. Whew, 2,000 words later. So what, right? So should you get a Nikon Z6? Now all the talk and all the praise that I just gave this camera, this might drive you crazy, but maybe. Look, I love this camera, and for me personally, it's the best. But again, I also already have a Ninja 5 recorder, and I use that on everything, which that's not a very cheap accessory. So if you already have XQD cards or an external recorder and you're looking for a full frame camera, yes, absolutely get the Z6. It's awesome, and I have zero problems recommending it to somebody that already has that ecosystem and infrastructure in their video production already built up. But if you don't have that and you're looking to get into full frame cameras, would I recommend the same? And in that instance, I would only recommend it if you are willing to grow it into a bigger system by, again, investing in something like XQD cards. If you're trying to get awesome quality on a tighter budget, I'd probably recommend the Fuji X-T3, which has an APS-C size sensor. But if you do want to get into full frame video and have the bigger budget, the Z6 is absolutely the camera I would recommend. Like, it's great. I've enjoyed using it. It's awesome. And even though I'm going to start using more Micro Four Thirds for some other stuff, if I want to use a full frame camera, I'm going to be using the Z6. It's incredible. Thanks for watching.